The story of Judas Maccabeus and his brothers, and the purification of the great temple, and the dedication of the altar, and further, the wars against Antiochus Epiphanes and his son Eupator, and the appearances which came from heaven to those who strove zealously on behalf of Judaism, so that though few in number, they seized the whole land and pursued the barbarian hordes, and recovered the temple famous throughout the world, and freed the city, and restored the laws that were about to be abolished, while the Lord with great kindness became gracious to them. All this, which has been set forth by Jason of Cyrene in 5 volumes, we shall attempt to condense into a single book. For considering the flood of numbers involved and the difficulty there is for those who wish to enter upon the narratives of history, because of the mass of material, we have aimed to please those who wish to read, to make it easy for those who are inclined to memorize, and to profit all readers. For us who have undertaken the toil of abbreviating, it is no light matter, but calls for sweat and loss of sleep, just as it is not easy for one who prepares a banquet and seeks the benefit of others. However, to secure the gratitude of many, we will gladly endure the uncomfortable toil, leaving the responsibility for exact details to the compiler, while devoting our effort to arriving at the outlines of the condensation. For as the master builder of a new house must be concerned with the whole construction, while the one who undertakes its painting and decoration has to consider only what is suitable for its adornment, such in my judgment is the case with us. It is the duty of the original historian to occupy the ground and to discuss matters from every side and to take trouble with details, but the one who recasts the narrative should be allowed to strive for brevity of expression and to forego exhaustive treatment. At this point, therefore, let us begin our narrative, adding only so much to what has already been said, for it is foolish to lengthen the preface while cutting short the history itself. While the holy city was inhabited in unbroken peace, and the laws were very well observed because of the piety of the high priest Onias and his hatred of wickedness, it came about that the kings themselves honored the place and glorified the temple with the finest presents, so that even Seleucus, the king of Asia, defrayed from his own revenues all the expenses connected with the service of the sacrifices. But a man named Simon, of the tribe of Benjamin, who had been made captain of the temple, had a disagreement with the high priest about the administration of the city market. And when he could not prevail over Onias, he went to Apollonius of Tarsus, who at that time was governor of Cilicia and Phoenicia. He reported to him that the treasury in Jerusalem was full of untold sums of money, so that the amount of the funds could not be reckoned, and that they did not belong to the account of the sacrifices, but that it was possible for them to fall under the control of the king. When Apollonius met the king, he told him of the money about which he had been informed. The king called Helidarius, who was in charge of his affairs, and sent him with the commands to effect the removal of the aforesaid money. Helidarius at once set out on his journey, ostensibly to make a tour of inspection of the cities of Cilicia and Phoenicia, but in fact to carry out the king's purpose. When he had arrived at Jerusalem and had been kindly welcomed by the high priest of the city, he told about the disclosure that had been made and stated why he had come, and he inquired whether this really was the situation. The high priest explained that there were some deposits belonging to the widows and orphans, and also some money of Hyrcanus, son of Tobias, a man of very prominent position, and that it totaled in all 400 talents of silver and 200 of gold. To such an extent the impious Simon had misrepresented the facts, and he said that it was utterly impossible that wrong should be done to those people who had trusted in holiness of the place and in the sanctity and inviolability of the temple, which is honored throughout the whole world. But Helidarius, because of the king's commands which he had, said that this money must be, in any case, confiscated for the king's treasury. So he set a day and went in to direct the inspection of these funds. There was no little distress throughout the whole city. The priests prostrated themselves before the altar in their priestly garments, and called toward heaven upon him who had given the law about deposits, that he should keep them safe for those who had deposited them. To see the appearance of the high priest was to be wounded at heart, for his face and the change in his color disclosed the anguish of his soul. For terror and bodily trembling had come over the man, which plainly showed to those who looked at him the pain lodged in his heart. People also hurried out of their houses in crowds to make a general supplication, because the holy place was about to be brought into contempt. Women clothed with sackcloth under their breasts thronged the streets. Some of the maidens who were kept indoors ran together to the gates, and some to the walls, while others peered out of the windows. And holding up their hands to heaven, they all made entreaty. There was something pitiable in the prostration of the whole populace, and the anxiety of the high priest in his great anguish. While they were calling upon the Almighty Lord that he would keep what had been entrusted safe and secure for those who had entrusted it, Helodarius went on with what had been decided. But when he arrived at the treasury with his guard, then and there the sovereign of spirits and of all authority caused so great a manifestation that all who had been so bold as to accompany him were astounded by the power of God, and became faint with terror. For there appeared to them a magnificently caparisoned horse, with a rider of frightening mien, and it rushed furiously at Helodarius and struck at him with its front hoofs. Its rider was seen to have armor and weapons of gold. 2 young men also appeared to him, remarkably strong, gloriously beautiful, and splendidly dressed, who stood on each side of him and scourged him continuously, inflicting many blows on him. When he suddenly fell to the ground, and deep darkness came over him, his men took him up and put him on a stretcher, and carried him away. This man who had just entered the aforesaid treasury with a great retinue in all his bodyguard, but was now unable to help himself, and they recognized clearly the sovereign power of God. While he lay prostrate, speechless because of the divine intervention and deprived of any hope of recovery, they praised the Lord who had acted marvelously for his own place. And the temple, which a little while before was full of fear and disturbance, was filled with joy and gladness, now that the Almighty Lord had appeared. Quickly, some of Helodarius' friends asked Onias to call upon the Most High, and to grant life to one who was lying quite at his last breath. And the high priest, fearing that the king might get the notion that some foul play had been perpetrated by the Jews with regard to Helodarius, offered sacrifice for the man's recovery. While the high priest was making the offering of atonement, the same young men appeared again to Helodarius, dressed in the same clothing, and they stood and said, "Be very grateful to Onias the high priest, since for his sake the Lord has granted you your life. And see that you, who have been scourged by heaven, report to all men the majestic power of God." Having said this, they vanished. Then Helodarius offered sacrifice to the Lord, and made very great vows to the Savior of his life. And having bidden Onias farewell, he marched off with his forces to the king. And he bore testimony to all men of the deeds of the supreme God, which he had seen with his own eyes. When the king asked Helodarius what sort of person would be suitable to send on another mission to Jerusalem, he replied, "If you have any enemy or plotter against your government, send him there, for you will get him back thoroughly scourged, if he escapes at all, for there certainly is about the place some power of God. For he who has his dwelling in heaven watches over that place himself and brings it aid, and he strikes and destroys those who come to do it injury." This was the outcome of the episode of Helodarius, and the protection of the treasury. The leader of his brethren, and the pride of his people, was Simon the high priest, son of Onias, who in his life repaired the house, and in his time fortified the temple. He laid the foundations for the high double walls, the high retaining walls for the temple enclosure. In his days, a cistern for water was quarried out, a reservoir like the sea in circumference. He considered how to save his people from ruin, and fortified the city to withstand a siege. How glorious he was when the people gathered round him, as he came out of the inner sanctuary. Like the morning star among the clouds, like the moon when it is full, like the sun shining upon the temple of the Most High, and like the rainbow gleaming in glorious clouds, like roses in the days of the first fruits. like lilies by a spring of water, like a green shoot on Lebanon on a summer day, like fire and incense in the censer, like a vessel of hammered gold, adorned with all kinds of precious stones, like an olive tree putting forth its fruit, and like a cypress towering in the clouds. When he put on his glorious robe, and clothed himself with superb perfection, and went up to the holy altar, he made the court of the sanctuary glorious. And when he received the portions from the hands of the priests, as he stood by the hearth of the altar, with a garland of brethren around him, like he was a young cedar on Lebanon, and they surrounded him like the trunks of palm trees. All the sons of Aaron in their splendor, with the Lord's offering in their hands, before the whole congregation of Israel, finishing the service at the altars, and arranging the offering to the Most High, the Almighty. He reached out his hand to the cup and poured a libation of the blood of the grape. He poured it out at the foot of the altar, a pleasing odor to the Most High, the King of all. Then the sons of Aaron shouted. They shouted the trumpets of hammered work. They made a great noise to be heard, for remembrance before the Most High. Then all the people together made haste and fell to the ground upon their faces to worship their Lord, the Almighty, God Most High. And the singers praised him with their voices, in sweet and full-toned melody. And the people besought the Lord Most High, in prayer before him who is merciful, till the order of worship of the Lord was ended. So they completed his service. Then Simon came down and lifted his hands over the whole congregation of the sons of Israel, to pronounce the blessing of the Lord with his lips, and to glory in his name. And they bowed down in worship a second time, to receive the blessing from the Most High. And now bless the God of all, who in every way does great things, who exalts our days from birth, who deals with us according to his mercy. May he give us gladness of heart, and grant that peace may be in our days in Israel, as in the days of old, that Israel may believe that the God of mercy is with us to deliver us in our days. With two nations my soul is vexed, and the third is no nation. Those who live in Mount Seir, and the Philistines, and the foolish people that dwell in Shechem. Instructions in understanding and knowledge I have written in this book. Jesus, the son of Sirach, son of Eleazar, of Jerusalem, who out of his heart poured forth wisdom. Blessed is he who concerns himself with these things, and he who lays them to heart will become wise. For if he does them, he will be strong for all things, for the light of the Lord is his path. And I saw a beast rising out of the sea, with 10 horns and 7 heads, with 10 diadems upon its horns, and a blasphemous name upon its heads. And the beast that I saw was like a leopard. Its feet were like a bear's, and its mouth was like a lion's mouth. And to it the dragon gave his power and his throne and great authority. One of its heads seemed to have a mortal wound, but its mortal wound was healed, and the whole earth followed the beast with wonder. Men worshipped the dragon, for he had given his authority to the beast, and they worshipped the beast, saying, Who is like the beast, and who can fight against it? And the beast was given a mouth uttering haughty and blasphemous words, and it was allowed to exercise authority for 42 months. It opened its mouth to utter blasphemies against God, blaspheming his name and his dwelling, that is, those who dwell in heaven. Also, it was allowed to make war on the saints and to conquer them, and authority was given it over every tribe and people and tongue and nation, and all who dwell on earth and worship it. Every one whose name had not been written before the foundation of the world in the book of life of the Lamb that was slain. If anyone has an ear, let him hear. If anyone is to be taken captive, to captivity he goes. If anyone slays with the sword must he be slain. Here is a call for the endurance and faith of the saints. Then I saw another beast, which rose out of the earth. It had 2 horns, like a lamb, and it spoke like a dragon. It exercises all the authority of the first beast in its presence, and makes the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast, whose mortal wound was healed. It works great signs, even making fire come down from heaven to earth in the sight of men, and by the signs which it allowed to work in the presence of the beast, it deceives those who dwell on earth, bidding them to make an image for the beast, which was wounded by the sword and yet lived. And it was allowed to give breath to the image of the beast, so that the image of the beast should even speak, and to cause those who would not worship the image of the beast to be slain. Also it causes all, both small and great, both rich and poor, both free and slave, to be marked on the right hand or the forehead, so that no one can buy or sell unless he has the mark, that is, the name of the beast or the number of its name. This calls for wisdom. Let him who has understanding reckon the number of the beast, for it is a human number. Its number is 666. Sirach describes the high priest Simon leading Israel in worship at the temple. The splendor of his priestly robes, the glory of the censer made of hammered gold adorned with all kinds of precious stones, and the rich description of the temple and its liturgy evoke comparison to the beauty of the sun, the moon, and the stars, and all of God's handiwork in creation. Here, Sirach brings his account of wisdom to its crescendo, showing how God's marvelous works of creation and humanity are embodied in the liturgical worship of God's people. This is the culmination of what is good, true, and beautiful, as humanity offers the good things of creation back to the Creator in worship. In return, the liturgy ends with the priestly blessing of Aaron, where the priest lifts up his hands and pronounces the name of God in blessing over the people. It was only the Levitical priest at the conclusion of the liturgy who could invoke the holy name. This story illustrates what is so significant about Zechariah being made mute in the temple due to disbelief, for he cannot pronounce the blessing. Liturgy reflects a marvelous cycle. God gives good things in creation to us. We offer them back in worship, and then God gives us grace and blessing in return. Do you pay attention with gratitude to the blessing God gives you at the end of Mass?